I can begin with a short introduction about myself. I guess it's not that usual that someone from the middle of Sweden is talking about some historical data about something that's in the Midwest of the USA. I'm actually born in Australia, and I lived in the Netherlands as well for 8.5 years. During the time that I was in the Netherlands, I picked up the model railroad bug again. Had more free time all of a sudden, and got into the Fremo thing. Bought a bit of everything, decided I needed to focus, and thought it would be Burlington Northern, and decided I should focus on an era, and 78 to 82 was interesting because it let me keep a lot of old equipment and also run some new equipment. But I never really found a good place to model. I never really found never really found a locale that I was interested enough to say that's how I want to model that. But I kept on coming back to the Minnesota commercials operations in South Minneapolis, and then one day it just dawned on me that you could model it as it was when the Milwaukee Road was running it back in the mid-1970s, or back from the beginning until the Sioux Line took over in 86, and then it went to the Minnesota commercial in 97. I hope you can hear me okay. I guess I haven't heard anything, so it's, yep. I'm trying to think. So I'm a little bit flustered at the start here. So yeah, I was trying to come up with a track plan for my basement room, which is about 8 by 16 feet. It's not that big. And I listed the help of Don DeLay, who's online on Facebook and does lots of track planning for different people. But I couldn't really, I felt there was something missing. And I went back and did a lot more research on the line. I didn't really want to do like a freelanced, just inspired by. I wanted to do something maybe a bit more prototypical. So this is probably about 18 months ago that I started researching online. And then a year ago, during the pandemic, the Twin Cities division of the NMRA, they had an online event instead of their getaway weekend where they have this modelers retreat, I think they call it. And so I offered to do a presentation there, and I put this together in a couple of weeks back then. So this is a repeat of that presentation, but I've added quite a few more slides because we don't have the time limit that we had back then. Also, I've uncovered a lot more new material, so I've added that as well. And some people missed that presentation, so that's why I'm also offering it again. Amongst others was Graham, who woke up early, put on the recording, and then went back to bed, woke up later, and the recording hadn't worked, so he missed it completely. Okay. So how did I...
Oh, there's a Jersey Mike's. Why does he want sandwiches?
Colin, sorry, I just muted you.
Yeah, I just unmuted myself. Yeah, so I think I discovered this area from probably some forum online where people were posting photographs of things they'd rail found on the weekend, and the Minnesota commercials operations in South Minneapolis kept on popping up. And I thought that was great. And I went back, I remember going to Google Maps and having a look at that time. And now I'm going to do the same. I'm not going to use Google Maps, I'm going to use Bing Maps, because Bing Maps has this one really neat feature that probably not everybody knows about, and it's called bird's eye view. Everybody's familiar with Google Maps where you look from above. With bird's eye view, it's slightly different. It's on an angle. But the killer feature is you can change the angle. They've got 4 different photographs for each location, taken from 4 different compass points. And so here you can get you can look from the 4 different angles, and you get a very good feeling for what the area looks like. And this whole alley is what really drew me to this particular location. I don't think there's many other locations where they really have such a long stretch of tracks with elevators on both sides, if you're going to Google Street View, you can sort of stand here and look down this way. Can you see the mouse when I move it? Yeah. So you can stand here in Google Maps, but I think Bing Maps is even cooler because you can move around. So this is what I was interested in. I wanted to try and replicate. And I think you can do it on quite a narrow shelf. I did some playing around with some mock-ups. You can cut down the number of tracks in the middle instead of like the prototypical 7 or 8 down to 4 or 5. And you still have room for probably 2, 3, 4 inches of structure on the aisle side and on the backdrop side. But that's when I finally get down to building a layout eventually, when I'm not stuck doing research. So yeah, I think maps are really cool. And I guess probably a lot of people who are into model areas do that. I'm going to show these later. I'm just going to minimize them for now. I'm going to pop into the slideshow. I'll start it there. And of course, this Google Maps, this isn't anything new. People have been jumping in airplanes and taking photographs ever since they learned to fly. And ever since we had cameras. This is from the early 1920s. And you have a view of the line here with the elevators on both sides. It's not quite as densely populated back then. A lot of these elevators were extended over time. And then eventually in the free spaces in between, lots of warehouses were built. I need to move something on top of the screen because I can't see the title of the. Oh, too bad. This is, I think, around about 1930s. And these photos were actually taken for the school districts so that people could identify where the schools were that they were going to go to. One more. Obviously, in these old photographs, you can still see these old wooden elevators, which were later replaced with big concrete structures. All right. Early on in my research, I came across this map. This is from a 1969 engineering department handbook, Milwaukee Road Engineering Department, that is. And it includes all over the country, all their terminal facilities, and also some general information about their network. And before I found this map, I didn't know what the line was called, didn't know that it had a name. Everybody calls it the line paralleling Hiawatha Avenue in South Minneapolis, which is quite a mouthful. And I found this map and I realized it had a name. It's called the I&M Elevated District. A little bit about the history of the Milwaukee Road in the Twin Cities. This used to be the main line coming into Minneapolis. The main line from Chicago came to St. Paul, then it went across the river via Mendota. They built a bridge over the Minnesota River, and they came up into Minneapolis, I think in about 1860s, 1870s. And very quickly, they decided this line wasn't fast enough and they wanted a faster connection. So they built a new line, which went up a very steep grade coming out of St. Paul, just past Chestnut Street. And then across, it's called the short line because, yeah, it made a shortcut. And if there's any indication that, or any sign that I really had to model this area, this here is called Hart's Yard, which is in South Minneapolis. Then eventually, this line was double track. The other old line was a single track. So not only was it shorter, but it also had more capacity. So this other line eventually was used less and less, I guess. And in 1957, they removed the bridge across the Minnesota River, and it just became a stub-ended industrial spur. I think that's all I have to say about that. Okay, yeah, we start. Yeah, I can just point out one or two more things. This area around here is called South Minneapolis Yard, or Southtown Yard, as a lot of people call it. I don't think it ever had the name Southtown, but I think there was a Northtown Yard, and so this one became called Southtown Yard. Maybe they were both nicknames, I don't know. The courtyard was from the time when they had passenger trains. They were built up and stored here. But later this turned into the diesel locomotive servicing when they removed the steam roundhouse, which was here. And they turned that into, as it says, automobile unloading and piggyback facilities. And that's what we can see here. This is taken in I think about 88, where all the there was a big stonking roundhouse here and lots of buildings here, and it's all gone. You can see the remnants here of the piggyback unloading tracks. And in the distance here, we can see this elevated district that I'm interested in. Another view from 1963 this time. So we're zooming in closer and closer, and also closer in terms of years. The first photos we saw from the 20s and 30s, and these are from 88 and 63. I should mention, when I was very frustrated early on as well with the lack of photos from the mid-1970s. I found lots of photos from other areas in the mid-1970s, a lot of other areas around Minneapolis, St. Paul, taken in the mid-70s, but not much along this line, nothing at all, in fact, until I really started digging. And so that's why I started this research, and I came across 1974 aerial photographs, which were a big help. On this photo, I can point out a few things we're going to be looking at. Minneapolis Moline had a big tractor factory here and farm machinery equipment. A lumber yard here, Western Westerbury Lumber Yard. We're going to be looking at warehouse here. We look at, this was Minneapolis Moline. All of this was Minneapolis Moline as well, I believe. And then we start getting to the various elevators and mills. And then further down the line, this photo, which says it's from 1938, I'll get to that in a minute. You're going to be seeing a few more of these blue tinted photographs. They're all photographs of photographs. They're photographs of posters, big placards. You can see the mounting hardware here. They're mounted on a new apartment complex, which was built on the site of this elevator, or mill. This was demolished in 2010. It's the Ralston Purina mill. And on its place, they built the Longfellow Station apartments. And outside of that, I don't actually know which wall, but they have hung a series of posters, a series of, well, they're not just paper, they're placards designed to stand the weather, showing the history of the area. And unfortunately, there's quite a few errors in these. So here it says 1938, but I know for a fact that this extension here was built around about 1947. We can see that here. In fact, here we have a 1974 aerial photograph, and there's no big square extension here on the end. Here's a 1970, what am I saying? I have to just move this a little bit. 1945 aerial photograph. No extension here. 1947 aerial photograph. This extension is complete, and it looks to be fairly new, judging by the state of things around here. And if we go back to this photograph, I know that this elevator here, called the Hun elevator, says 1915, raised. It was destroyed in 1950. So we can date this photograph between 1947 and 1950. And maybe it's 1948, maybe it's just a typo that the 3 should have been a 4. So that's one of the themes we're going to be seeing again and again. It's corroborating evidence, corroborating the photographs against each other, making sure they add up. Now, the aerial photographs, I'm pretty sure that they're correct. If they say it's taken April 1974, May 1974, I'm pretty sure they're correct. And the other photographs I have confirmed that. So I'm using those as a base. Okay, we go back down to ground level. This is the South Town Yard from the ground, and there's a transfer here taking in a load of auto racks to be unloaded. Here you can see actually an auto rack truck trailer with some cars on it, and the unloading racks were behind this building. So this is, I think this train's coming around the bend from St. Paul, and then it will shove these cars back into the unloading ramps. So this locomotive is heading in the conventional direction. These other switches you can see here, you can see they all have their cabs facing north. And you're going to be seeing this again and again as well. All the switches that were operating on the industrial in the elevator district, which we're going to be looking at, all the photos I've seen of end cab switches, the cab is on the north end of the line. This must have to do with the visibility in switching some tight locations. There is one photograph, and that's in the CP era, where the switch are facing the other way. Maybe they didn't get the memo. A couple of things to notice is these electricity poles. They're very common around Twin Cities. I'm not sure if they're more common around the US in general, but they're very common around the Twin Cities. And a lot of these have been around for decades, and you can see them still today on Google Maps. So they're very handy when you're trying to place a photograph on Google Maps today. Sometimes they'll be tall and have extra arms, and you can locate just that one on Google Maps, and you know you found exactly the right location. So yeah, we can see the elevator district here in the distance. So we go a bit further south now. We come past, you can see here just maybe a line going across. This was the east-west Milwaukee Road line, which came from St. Paul on the east. And if you go here to the right, you go to the west, and you end up in Seattle eventually. This was taken 1960s. We can see the Minneapolis molding factory here in the distance. I'm not going to go too much into this one because this was destroyed before my era of interest. This was destroyed in 1973. They moved out of Minneapolis. I'm not sure where they moved further out. I'm not sure if the city had anything to do with it because some other industries moved as well. And then shortly after, they built some new shops on the site. Maybe the city wanted them gone. Maybe they wanted to move themselves. I don't know. Maybe it's a combination of factors. You can see some maintenance of weight, which was stored here. We'll see another photo of that in a minute. Also here, we can see Leader Brothers, L-E-D-E-R Brothers, We Buy Scrap Iron and Metal Scrapyard. They were also here, and they moved. They actually moved a bit further south on the same line. We'll see them again in a minute. And here in the distance, we can see one of the first elevators. That's the Monarch elevator. I think that's, oh yeah, the placard here. Something Mow Line for Progress in Farm and Industrial Machinery. Or Moline, I think you guys called it. And this was after White took them over. They changed their logo, a big modern MM, North Finance Tractors. So this is sometime between post 1963 when White took them over and before 73 when, I guess before 73 when it was demolished. Because we like trains, I'm not going to include so many building photographs of this particular place, but I'll include train photos where I can. A VO1000 switcher, I'm pretty certain by the details of the hand railing and the steps here. Again, cab is on the north end it is facing north. Export tractors for Greece, 1955 model approximately. We're going to see this overhead crane again a few times as well. The overhead crane is here. It's paralleling the tracks, so you can get a idea. If this is the same switcher, I don't know, but it's also a VO1000. I can move this thing on the top of the screen. Great. Sometime between 1952 and 59. I think 1952 is when this locomotive was built, or maybe renumbered, and 1959 is when it was definitely renumbered. The Milwaukee Road had a habit of renumbering its locomotives. They at least once a decade, just for fun. And to make things more confusing, they would assign existing numbers to other locomotives of very similar types. So you'll have a VO1000 have a number which then goes to an S12 or a DS4 4000, and it's very, very confusing. You have to look at the spotting feature of the locomotive. You have to look at the date of the photograph. I have a list. I've made quite a list. You can get that from me if you're interested. Another recurring feature of this presentation is going to be this particular map. One of the placards on that building we talked about is a map of the location, and I'm going to use that as a sort of a guide through this presentation. And so we've come now to Lake Street here, which, if it was following the numbers, would be called 30th Street. I don't know if it's ever had the name 30th Street, but it's called Lake Street in real life. And Moline was north of that, as was the Leader Brothers scrapyard, which then moved further south later. Here, as from aerial photograph, again from the 1963 collection, there's quite a few taken in 1963 of this oblique angle photograph. Moline is here. You have the Westland Westerbury lumberyard here. It's quite a small, compact lumberyard. Other industries along here that were rail served sometime in the past: Acme Foundry, they cast iron, but they stopped being rail served probably in the 40s or something, or 50s. I haven't seen any photos or any information. Never. Chargale warehouse, which we'll see again in a minute. Looks like there's a boxcar there actually. The loading docks were at this end. Yeah, and Lake Street is the one that runs across here. So that would be 30th, 31st, 32nd here. This is a really, really nice shot. I've been drooling over this one. Lake Street crossing, 1940s. The end of this traveling crane from Moline, Minneapolis Moline. Griswold crossing signal. These were very popular in the Midwest, especially around the Twin Cities. Unfortunately, there are no good models of these available at the moment. There was one guy making them, but he stopped making them. And there's a very crude one available from NJ. The old style writing on the crossbucks, and the old style stop sign with the bug eye, which light up in the dark. The locomotive is actually pushing the caboose here. You can see some smoke here and some smoke here. And I have some other photo with another photo taken just before this, where the locomotive is a bit to the right with more smoke. So I know it's traveling south here. And again, the cab is on the north end, even for this steam switcher. A couple other things you want to notice is the tracks from the streetcars, which were probably removed in the 50s when they stopped running them, and the old style street lighting. Sometime between 1961 and 68, and this is dated, this was an undated photograph, but with my friend Craig Zini likes identifying models of cars. This is in 1961, something, I forgot the model and the brand, he'll tell me. And this particular VO 1000 was retired in 1968, so I know this photo is somewhere between 61 and 68. The streetlights are now modern. The Starbucks, the Griswold crossing signals that had their crossbacks replaced and stop sign replaced with more modern versions. And again, you can see the traveling crane here, and remember that's perpendicular to the tracks, so the tracks are going at a bit of an angle in this photograph, and they're all on an angle when they cross all the roads in this area. Did I say again, cab switcher, cab end, north end of the line. Same crossing in the 1974 aerial photographs. These were found on the Minneapolis Historical Aerial Photographs online. I can pop up the information page that I had before. I can pop that up again later. You can see the link there. I was very happy to find those, and there's quite a, I can actually just show that since this is going to be a little bit more interactive. It's tied. Oh, there it goes. Minneapolis Historic Aerial Photographs online. The left ones here cover the whole of Minnesota. If you click on the right tab here, Minneapolis, you have these sets of photographs. And the 1974 collection, which suits me because I want a model 75 and 76, these are very, very clear. And then the 1993 ones I think are quite clear. And I think 61 is a good set because it has the the names of the roads stenciled onto the slide, onto the photographs, so you don't have to grab an atlas to find out what the road is called. So that's where that's from. So I'm using these aerial photographs, which I have very few photographs from the 70s, as mentioned, but I have this aerial photograph set from 1974, which is very clear. And I use that together with older photographs and more modern photographs just to sort of build up an image of what the area looked like in the mid-1970s. And I can, spoiler alert, nothing changed very much at all. You have some buildings which haven't changed in decades. So this is the aerial photograph of the Lake Street crossing we saw. We can see here and here, we can see the Griswold crossing signals, which is interesting for me because I like to have those on the layout if somebody comes up with a nice model of those. Now the Westland Westerbury Lumberyard was just south of Lake Street. And this had a very interesting track arrangement. And this is what all the track planners say you shouldn't do in your layout. Have a very short lead here and then switch back into the industry. You can't fit more than locomotive and one car. But I don't think it switched that way, because when I saw an aerial photograph, I could see a bulkhead flat car standing here, and it's sort of standing on the track where you would come in with a locomotive. So there's no way they could have switched this car with a locomotive. This car has been moved by hand or with some sort of winch or with a tractor or something. So I'm guessing what happened is the Milwaukee Road just shoved in the car that they wanted, and they moved it around closer to where they wanted to unload into one of their sheds. And they moved that themselves. And when they were done, they would put it back and the railroad would come and get it. The type of flat car we can identify from this photograph, 1966. And this was an interesting puzzle. FTD. And I posted this on the modern freight cars list on Groups.io. And they told me it's the Fort Dodge, Des Moines and Southern Railroad, and had very interesting reporting marks, FTDDM and S, which are much too long because they're supposed to be 4 letters. And that's like about 6 plus an ampersand. And it's either become FTDD or FDDM, depending on who you talk to. But anyway, they transferred a lot of gypsum wallboard. So that's definitely what's being loaded here. And I blew up this photograph and blew out the highlights a bit so you could see what's here. And this is the locker box which they had at the end of these early bulkhead flat cars, where they stored the joint tape and joint compound that you would get with the wallboard when you bought them. It wasn't like today where you buy one thing from one place and other stuff in another place. No, they gave you everything you needed in one go. And here you can actually see this this gypsum wallboard on this bulkhead flat car. And I believe this is a very popular building material back then, probably still is now. Okay, we're going to start looking a bit further south. We get to the Chargale warehouse here. They had several warehouses along the line. And Chargale was a manufacturer of ductwork for furnaces and ventilation. And I've seen some other photographs with some bigger doors on this end of the building. So it looks like there's kind of boxes cars there being unloaded. The Monarch Elevator, the State Testing Company, the Cargill Minneapolis Seed Company, and ADM McCormick's Mill, as it's called today. I'm not sure what it was called in the past. This is the Chargale warehouse under construction in 1946. It looks like a fairly modern building, but 46. It screams Walthers. And here you can see, even when they were constructing it, they had equipment being delivered by rail, and they would unload it into this truck, and they would drive inside, I guess, and move it close to where they need it. On the other side here, we have what looks like some sort of works department, but I believe it's actually the Minneapolis Moline parts warehouse. So either parts for customers who had already bought and needed spare parts, or parts that were going to go into newly constructed tractors. And I believe even the block north was also Minneapolis Moline. Acme Foundry was here. And this was some public works building, but I forget what it was, either water pumping station or fire station or something. It's a historical building. This still exists today, as does this and this. But this is being, I think, classified, so it's not allowed to be demolished. And this later turned into Leader Brothers scrapyard, and this track here was no longer used by them for loading scrap gondolas, but they would use the other one here closer to the main line. Later on, Carpenter Paper took over this building, but I don't think they were rail served, and this building certainly wasn't rail served in the 70s anymore, unfortunately. This photograph is undated, but we know it's 1956 or later by the vehicles. Again, thanks to Craig. Sioux Line era, Bandit, 1995. You can see the unloading doors of the warehouse. This door is actually on the end, and this door is on the side. They've whitewashed the end of the buildings because that's what the public sees to look good, but they haven't bothered with the side of the railway line, of course. Again, the switcher's cab is on the north end of the line. And then once you get into the digital camera era, you start seeing lots of photographs from all sorts of different people. This is just some random person walking home from work, apparently, took this photo one afternoon. I haven't seen so many photos of this building, but I was happy to find this one. And it looks like they built these windows like this with the sort of spacing of a 40-foot boxcar, so they could later make them tall if they needed to. Here is the same location again. You can see the track here has been truncated, so there's no way this is being rail served anymore. This is 1974 area photographs, the set that I'm using. And you can see that track I mentioned before is no longer being used for us, but they're using this spur here for loading the gondolas with scrap metal. And that's what you can see here. Just before the turn of the millennium, Minnesota Commercial switching out. They seem to have quite a lot of cars pulling the gondola inside. And they've already, I think they've already pulled out the loaded gondola, and they're now pushing in probably an empty. So that's probably how that industry was switched in the Milwaukee Road time as well, judging by the aerial photograph showing the other track being covered with other things being in the way of it being used by rail. So that scrapyard was in here, but this is a much older photograph. This is 1939. So this is the first elevator on the line that we're going to look at. Also the oldest along the line, or one of the oldest along the line, built in around 1880. PV logo, as you can see. Notice that the actual elevator head and house, or I guess you call it, is taller than the storage building. It doesn't look like that on the aerial photographs. That's why I just want to point that out to you. It looks like it's shorter here, but it's tall. You can see the side here in the photograph because of the angle. Other things to note in this photograph, you can see lots of different types of freight cars. A lot of single bay air slides. I haven't seen any double bay air slides in these 1974 photos. I'm guessing it's because the industries were designed to cater for 40-foot boxcars, and the 50-odd foot double bay air slides were simply too long. But the single bay air slides were a little bit shorter, so they still fit. That's my theory. But there are also covered hoppers, you can see here, as well as ordinary boxcars. Yeah, that's what I wanted to mention. 1974, the building is here. 1978, it's gone. And that's confirmed by the newspaper clipping. It was newspaper clipping 23rd of July 1974. And it also tells us the reason. The all-wood structure was damaged by a fire several years ago. So apparently it wasn't worth trying to repair. Or maybe it was, yeah, too far gone and too old. Unfortunately, because I thought it was quite a nice looking building. Okay, now we have come to the elevators and mills that are actually visible on these maps. And the first ones we're going to look at are I and H. I is the Cargill Minneapolis Seed Company, and H is the state testing mill. Now on this map, they would have you believe they're both on the same side of the tracks, but that was not the case. This H should be on the opposite side of the tracks. So there's another mistake here in the picture, in their artwork. And this is the state testing mill blurb that they had there. Priority Milling took over them because they no longer had to test the wheat and flour samples in the same way. So it was sold to a milling company in 1939. In 1948, they created Calvita, and then in 1968, they turned it into a bigger factory, Calvita factory. And that's what you can see here. So this Sanborn insurance map also proves it was on the other side of the track, Priority Mills. And that's this big building here. Now on the opposite side of the tracks, we have the Cargill Minneapolis Seed Company. And also of interest here is another Baldwin switcher going about its duties. And again, notice the cab is on the north end of the line. I'm sounding like a stuck record here, but that's one of the things I'm observing from these photographs. So if you're going to operate a model of this line, you're going to have your switches facing north. One other thing I'd like to point out on this aerial photograph, 1974, this box here on the roof. It says here in the 1960s and 70s, they were studying elevator safety, including grain dust explosions. And it was closed in 1983, but the building is still there today, almost 40 years later. It's being used for some other purpose, I guess. Amongst other as a place to mount mobile phone antennas. This is a 1997 slide I bought off eBay just a few months ago. It just popped up as a Sue-line covered hopper slide, and I recognized the location, so I just had to buy the slide. 2003, this is very early digital camera era. And I've tried not to include too many because there's a veritable explosion of images once digital cameras became popular. But I've included a few from the very early 2000s. And again, you can see this very modern looking box on the roof. And if you didn't know, you would say that was added probably 1990s or even in the 2000s. But we saw that in 1974 on the aerial photograph. So that was there already in 1974. And here you can see the mobile phone antennas that have been added. And I said I wasn't going to add many more later slides, but I've included a few here. The phone antennas have changed, of course. They got, or one of the other customers further down the line got their own critter. And again, it's operating with the cab on the north end of the line. And I included this photograph because it was taken just a few weeks, maybe even days before I gave the previous presentation. All of a sudden, it popped up on Flickr a few days beforehand, so I just had to include it. Again, lots and lots of mobile phone antennas of all sorts on this building. That's probably where they make their money from. That's what happened to most of the building, even though I believe the rest of the building is now used for a completely different business. This is now the 35th Street crossing, and this for me is a signature scene on the layout. You'll see in a minute why. There's this unloading bay here, which is very close to the road, so that when they open this and shove in the cars, they're blocking the traffic. You can see on this photograph the distinctive shadow of the Griswold crossing signal here. So I know that the Griswolds were still here in place in the mid-1970s. I can't see on this side of the road because it's in the shadow. And again, this is the same. This is just a crop of the same photograph as before. You can see the Baldwin switcher here. Here is an early Minnesota commercial era photograph showing the edge of the loading bay with a door, which is a double fold door. And here it's open, receiving a couple of double bay air slides, or maybe even 3. So obviously they've rebuilt their infrastructure now to support longer cars, but they didn't in the mid-1970s yet. The crossing signal's been replaced, of course. This is, of course, 40 years later almost. the building is starting to look very, very tattered. It wasn't this, it didn't look this bad in the 1970s. I just had to include another photo of this very cool critter. They've added extra hand railings on the side, probably for safety. And also because you can see the double fold door here very clearly. Right, including the map again to see where we were. 35th Street, which is here. And you can see D with unloading bay here on the corner is the Andrews Mill elevator, Minneapolis Milling Company, eventually bought by ADM, and now called their Nokomi's Mill. Sounds kind of Japanese. I believe that recently closed a few years ago. Here's a view from a couple of streets back. 1966, a guy was walking around all the streets taking photographs of every single house. And I don't think the elevator was the object of the photo, but rather this shed in the foreground. But in the background, we can see the elevator and the dust collectors as they were in 1966 or late 66 even. Another view. And here's an aerial view from 1974 of the entire complex. I think I tried to make out whether or not you could see the dust collectors, but I couldn't really see here in the shadows. You can see that there were a couple of tracks here on the road side of the building as well. Coming in all the way from here. I would like to try and include that in the model, but it's going to be very difficult because I have fairly narrow shells. But I can reduce the depth of the complex quite a bit. Maybe even completely. Maybe just have them just all the way down here in a single track. I believe one of these buildings here was the yard office for what was actually called the 35th Street Yard. All these switches here are the end of a yard ladder. I can show you on the map here. Maybe the map is clearer. Here is 35th Street. Now lost. Priority Mills. Yeah, here is 35th Street. It gets very confusing with lots of extra black ink for pipe work and stuff. And the loading bay is here. Here is what looks like a yard ladder and lots of tracks here. So this is actually classified, this is actually called the 35th Street Yard. And there was no railroad crossing here, so they could have cars stored here. But further along here, there was a railroad crossing here. They had to be careful to keep clear. And in one of the earlier photos we saw in the presentation, I'm not sure if you probably didn't notice, there were cars up to here and there were also cars up to here. So they had kept the road free. And the Milwaukee Road had a job. One of the books there's a 5-book set. No one on that. I can put some up again. There's a 5-book set published by Four Ways West called Milwaukee Road Locomotives. Volume 3 includes the Baldwins, and if you look in the description of the photographs of all the Baldwin locomotives, it keeps on describing all the different jobs that particular locomotive was assigned to. So one photograph might say this locomotive was assigned to the 35th Street job on this date, or in the morning of this date, and then the garden yard job on that afternoon. So from that, I managed to construct a rather long list of all the different jobs that Milwaukee Road had around the Twin Cities. And one of the jobs was the 35th Street job, 35th Street Yard job. And because of the name of that, I understood that this 35th Street yard existed, and that must be all of these tracks here. Nowadays, there is another yard office here, a more modern building, but that wasn't there in 1974, unless it's further down in the shadows. And that's the fact that was a yard is probably the reason why there were several photographs of locomotives taken outside of that loading bay And this photograph was actually, I think, labeled as St. Paul. And one day I was going through my photographs, which I'd saved of all the Baldwin locomotives, and I came across this photo, and I recognized this panel on the loading bay, which I'd seen from some other photographs, and the sloping roof. So then I realized immediately that was the loading bay of the Nokomis Mill in South Minneapolis. So you have to be careful with captions of photographs you find online. They're often just labeled Minneapolis or St. Paul will be switched. You'll find photographs labeled Milwaukee when they're actually Minneapolis. Another photograph of locomotives stationed outside the same elevator. In the MP15AC, fairly new here. This is March 1976 in the same loading bay. So again, there's nobody in here. They must have tied down the locomotive and gone for beans or between jobs, between days. A view from inside the loading bay. This is a fairly recent photo, 2019. Kirk, he might even be online. I saw that he was interested in the presentation, at least on Facebook. So thanks for that photograph. And he's turned around, looking the other way, and you can see a lot of the unloading infrastructure inside the building. And I would think that it hasn't changed that much inside either, that they've just adjusted the position of the unloading chutes to suit the bigger cars. Early digital camera era photograph, 2003, the same complex. You can see again on the street side, several covered hoppers here. There used to be 2 tracks here on the street side. Nowadays it's just a single track. A truck loading bay. I'm not sure how much of this is so interesting to me. I don't have the depth to make this deep anyway. So, and I want trains, not trucks, for my layout. Okay, next elevators we're going to be looking at are on the opposite side of the tracks. Here, labeled with A and C. Spencer Grain Elevator T, later bought by Cargill after Spencer went broke. And C, Cargill Elevator with General Mills. Spencer Elevator T was this big wooden structure here on the front, whereas the Cargill elevator was the one on the back with the concrete silos. Yeah, again from the other end, from the next road across, from the next road further south. There's a whole bunch of 1939 photos in the Library of Congress website. If you search for Minneapolis Mill or Minneapolis Elevator on the Library of Congress website, in their images database, you'll come across quite a few hundreds taken in 1939 September. Now, they weren't all taken at that time. This is when they were published. I'm guessing there was a survey done of some sort, and they're all available there with very high resolution downloads. And you'd think this would be interesting for steam era modelers with grain doors here on side of the tracks. But even for us more modern modelers, I can compare this photograph with some taken today, and very few details have actually changed. So these are still fairly relevant photos. And the other thing to remember is if you're modeling 1975 from 1939 was 36 years, but if you add 36 years to 1975, you get 2011, which is already 11 years ago. So any photograph taken in the last 11 years is actually further away from the modeling era than this photograph is. So this photo is actually more accurate in some respects. On the road behind this elevator is a church, African Methodist Episcopal Church. And on that photograph, I could see that on the bridge between 2 parts of the structure, there's a bridge which has Cargill stenciled on it. And later on, when I looked at the aerial photograph, I realized it was also on the other side. You can make it out here, Cargill. And this here is where 36th Street would have been. I'm not sure if it ever went underneath or if they had to leave it open for some reason. But there's a bridge between the two parts of the structure here, but there's definitely no road between there today. It does look suspicious with the other structure cut off from the same line. A ground level view from the next street, which I think is 37th Street, because 36th Street was the one that was here under the bridge. This is a fairly recent discovery. There's a site called the Lake States Archive, and they charge quite a bit of money. I think $10 a slide for digital images. But they had a sale 1.25% off, so I bought quite a few. And this was one of the ones that I bought a high resolution download of. One of the very few photographs I have of something actually, an action shot in 1975. And someone can tell me what particular model of cover top of this is. I haven't had the time to research that. Soo Line era photograph. And this is the first and only photograph I've seen of an end cab switcher with the cab facing south. So I'm guessing they just didn't get the memo. This was a former North Louisiana and Gulf switcher, which went to the CP. CP leased a bunch of these for several years in the end of the 1990s, early 2000s. The elevators were looking rather tatty at this point in time. And later on, I guess they were resealed or something, because they look much better today. And this is also the only photograph I've seen of a Jeep switching in this area. Of course, today Minnesota commercial uses quite a bit large power as well, but from further away, fairly early digital camera era again. You can see the light rail here in the foreground. This is the 37th Street crossing. Here you can see very clearly shadows of a stop sign and crossbucks. So no signals here for this crossing in 1974. 37th Street here isn't marked on this map, but there is a road here. So there's another inaccuracy. Road coming right through here. That was the stop signs we just saw. And so now we're going to look at B and E on this map. We're going to look at them together in one go, because here we have photographs looking down this alley quite a few times. So they're showing both buildings. So you have the Searle elevator on one side, later on called the General Mills Checkerboard. On the other side, we have the Atkinson Mill. The Searle elevator changed ownership, and the new owner decided to tear down a wooden structure and put up some concrete. A head house and two new silos, and you can see them very clear in this next photo that this is the new head house here, and the two new silos are these two here. I believe the other ones here are welded metal, I guess, while these other ones are concrete. Here in the distance we can see the Schreiber Mill, which was demolished in 1955, and just a faint glimpse of the Perina Mill with their distinctive checker pattern, and the Farmers Union elevator in the distance. Again, this is from the 1939 collection that's on the Library of Congress site. John W. Barringer III, probably a name that quite a few of you guys recognize. He was a railroad executive, and he traveled around the country with a camera, and he took lots and lots and lots of photographs, and they're all available on Flickr. And somehow I discovered he had been through Minneapolis, and I scrolled through the photos and tried to see if he went through this area, and I got lucky. So he'd come up over the old bridge from Mendota, going up to downtown Minneapolis, or going the other way. I'm not sure. I'm guessing he could have been in the back of the train in some sort of observation car, and he was taking the photographs out the back as the train was going backwards. He wouldn't have been up in the front with the firemen, I guess. So this is looking north. You can see that first elevator we saw, which was later demolished. You can see the Nokomis Mill that we looked at before, but here the Atkinson Mill and Cargill T, I think. I keep getting names mixed up. I have a cheat sheet here on the other monitor. Make sure I say the right thing. Searle Grain Company, General Mills checkerboard. Some details, 1939 loading chute spout looked like this. That hasn't changed much over the years either. This was John Barringer. You can tell this photo is a little bit blurrier compared to, because he was on a moving train, faster shutter speed. This is from the 1939 collection again, probably taken with a larger frame camera, maybe on a post or even on a tripod. You can see the smoke here from some steam locomotive which is working in the distance. Again, from the 1939 collection, this is taken from a few roads over, probably mainly for the billboards. 1939 collection, but here it says 38 Dodge, and they wouldn't be advertising 38 Dodge in 1939. So this photograph was taken earlier, so that's proof that the photographs were taken over a period beforehand, and then they were published in September 39. Notice also the end of this building here. This is shorter. Nowadays, this building is quite a bit longer. They built an extension after a fire in the 1940s. This is from a few roads back on the other side. And I've put the address here. I don't think the address was on the download, but I plugged the address into. I have to move the thing around on my screen again. Did I get it right? Yes, I got the right address. Google Street View. What do you think? I think the houses are still the same. This house, this house, this house. That house, that house. I can move one step over as well. So again, not much has changed. And if we just take it one step back, now I can't see so well. If we take one step back again and zoom in on the building we're interested in. The only main things I can see they've changed on the elevator in 80 years are these extra pipes coming down here, and this little extra addition on the roof. But that might even be on the other side of the tracks on the other elevator. So very few differences in 80 years. Even the houses are still there. This was the Atkinson Mill, taken when there was a fire. You have all the calamity tourists here taking a look. Another photo from a few streets back, undated, but my friend Craig has again dated this as early 1990s, so we get an idea that the elevators must have been recoated again because they're in rather good condition now. I found these photographs fairly shortly before I gave the presentation the first time, and this shows that they've had an addition to the loading spout that previously there was the single pipe going down, but now they've added a second pipe here. Presumably for some covered hoppers that had hatches on both sides, and they want to be able to fill the car evenly on both sides, rather than pumping it all down one side. And we'll see a second photo from the other direction, from the same photographer in 1989. Griswold crossing signals. I was very pleased to find this photograph. Crossing signal still there in 1989, and you can see the extension has been built onto the end of the Atkinson Mill here. The fire escape is gone, and the building is quite a bit longer now. Smoky Alco or Montreal Locomotive Works, I believe, RS18. Just before the turn of the millennium, after the Minnesota Commercial took over the lease on the line. Well, they got a lease on the line from the Canadian Pacific to operate the trains. very early digital camera era, or maybe still a scan slide, I'm not sure, but 2001. Minnesota Commercial acquired B-23-7 from Conrail. Going back one street again, this is between the elevators again. These were in chronological order, not in location order. This is 2009. The road between has just a stop sign and crossbucks these days. I'm not sure what it has in 74. I'd have to look on the aerial photographs. So that was the 37th Street. Yeah, the aerial photographs we saw, they had stop signs. The stop signs are still there today as well. Maybe they've been replaced in one time, but there are still stop signs now. So now we're going to look at the G and F on the map. We're at 38th Street. We have Ralston and Perina, which originally was Clark's milling company. And this was destroyed in 2010. Schreiber Mill destroyed in 1955 on the other side of the tracks. Schreiber Mill here on the left, Ralston and Perina here on the right. Again, this is a John W. Barringer on a moving train, so it's a little bit blurry. But from the other 1939 collection, we have this very clear shot. This is very sharp for that time, I think. And you can see the Farmers Union as well in the distance, and lots and lots of grain doors. Again, from the 1966 collection, the focus of the photograph is Beek's Pizza, not the elevators, but we have the Ralston Perina here on the left and the checkerboard on the background. As mentioned, this Ralston, I say Ralston Perina complex was rather ugly and messy, in my opinion. Lots of extension and over the years and different styles. Not something that I was really particularly interested in modeling. 2003, early digital era photograph. 2004, still fairly early on in the digital camera era, I mean. And I found this on an urban exploration site where they had been in the building and climbed all over it. I think taken in just after it closed, before it was demolished. Outside on the ground, this modern building here was actually built shortly after the Schreiber Mill was demolished in 1955. You can see that again in another photo in a minute. The train here, these are all lumber boxcars. There's all door cars here, and the 3 double door boxcars. So they were all used for lumber loads. Because there was another lumber yard, a big lumber yard, just a little bit down the line. And again, here, the cab is on the north, facing the north end of the line. This is an S12. You can see that by the frame, which extends all the way to the stepwell. There's no gussets here. Gusset would mean a DS4 1000, and the VO 1000 is a little bit longer. That's how you can tell them apart. This is an MU equipped S12. There were a few of those low in the number range. They had MU on one end only, on the cab end. This locomotive has actually run around the train. We'll see another photograph in a minute where the locomotive's on the other end and they're facing south. There was a runaround track at the bottom end of the line, just south of the Minnehaha depot. So they would run around and then they would come back pulling their cars, so they didn't have to shove all the way back. Again, you can see this modern looking building here, but this was built in 1955 or 6. I have an aerial photograph which shows this in place in 1956. New. Other things you can see on this photograph are the electricity pylons, and these are very clearly visible in the 1974 photographs as well. So they've been around forever. This was taken in 2021 on my birthday, believe it or not. Now we've run out of those blue maps, so I have to go back to some other maps. So we have here a Sanborn map. We've come down to 40th Street. We come to another lumber yard, but this is not the large one I was talking about. This is Hiawatha Lumber, which is still a fairly small business. And on the left side was a company called Lake Street Sash and Door, which later on became Bellis Paper. And that was rail served. at least up until 78, when a guy was working there unloading bags of, what did he write? I have a note somewhere here where he wrote coarse paper, bundles of paper bags jammed from the floor to the ceiling in a boxcar, and they had to hand unload. And this was in the late 70s, which I find a little bit unbelievable, but we'd have to check that with some more knowledgeable experts if that could still be happening in the late 70s. Here is the Lake Street Station door, accompanied first with a single story building here. The tracks are here and behind. I think this is a box car here standing here. It looks like some reporting marks. And I know the loading bay was actually close to there, so that's the logical location for a box car to be. Later on, they added a second story. And some other sort of warehouses on the end. And this building still exists today, even those other warehouses in the end. I think they've been turned into some loft apartments or something. Here in this, as you can see, HI for Hiawatha Lumber. It actually had another name, and I forgot to include that photograph. I could actually dig that out after if we're still interested. Here's the loading bay as it is today, where they had trucks. Trucks would stand here and load in. This was taken in 2021 by Brian Weston. He was the guy who was working there in the late 70s, unloading boxcars by hand. And here, a 1961 photograph showing a boxcar here. So that's why I believe that the loading bay was actually on this end of the building. And here you can see the Hiawatha Lumber Yard, on the opposite side of the tracks. Hiawatha Lumber Yard, unfortunately, was a victim of the corona pandemic. They shut down in 2020. That's very sad. It's been around for a really long time. 1950s, mid-1950s photo, apparently, according to my friend Craig, who's the vehicle expert, plus the style of phone number being used here, DU2358. Apparently, a bit later on, they changed to longer phone numbers, so they wouldn't have had that anymore. (1974) view of the Hiawatha Lumber Yard. Here you can see even that there's a boxcar standing here. So it was definitely still well served in 1974. You can see the shadow of one of the pylons here. Next up, I guess, is J, which is the Farmers Union elevator. This was built in the 1930, and was an extension to first of the old Minnehaha elevator. I didn't find a better or higher resolution copy of this colored. I have a black and white version of this photograph, but not higher resolution, so I included this one instead. Notice here that the roof line is lower at the front than the back, and you'll see in a minute that the roof line at the front is higher. It's been extended. Here you can see the elevator under construction, the concrete extension that is, and the foreground still in operation is the old wooden elevator with extension on the side and the roof. This has gone high, and you can see a line here where the roof line used to be. This threw me at first that it was higher in the front and not in another photograph, but then I noticed the line here, so it's been extended. And it's building on the side, obviously, as well. And then after they opened, a couple of years later, it burnt to the ground anyway. So maybe it was an insurance job. I shouldn't say that. But it burnt down to the ground, the old wooden part. So they had to build a new loading house on the front, which is here. This is again from the 1939 collection that's available on the Library of Congress website. 1992, they had painted a mural on the elevator. I think the mural is still there. Maybe it might be a bit faint these days, but with locals can confirm. Changed owners, Harvest Estates Corporation now, and they repainted the top dark blue. Well, that faded fairly quickly because by the 2003 early digital camera era, it's gone all grey. One of the artsy photographs I found on Flickr, and from the same photographer, I found this neat shot. keep railroad cars back 10 foot from doors. And it doesn't take long to realize that's because otherwise we couldn't open them. You can see hinges here on the side, so they swing open. They need to be able to open the doors. Chargale had another warehouse further down the line, down at 43rd and 44th, between 43rd and 44th Street. Very similar design building, built around the same time, I believe, 46 construction. You can see the elevator we were just looking at here in the distance. You can also see that it's a cross buck here and stop sign, I think, on the road, which is just behind the building. I don't know whether this building was rail served. And Chargo actually had 3 warehouses. You can see part here on the side. 3 warehouses, but I don't know, I couldn't find the location of the third, but maybe it was elsewhere in the city, not along the line. A lot of tourist trains actually went down this line as well, because they had the Minnehaha Depot at the end of the line, which is a very popular tourist destination. And they could, because of the stub-ended line, they could just park the trains there and wouldn't be in the way of anything. So that was the place to keep visiting tourist trains in the Twin Cities area. And so this is a 1978 photo of the Royal Hudson, which toured around the US, I guess. You can see some of the elevators we've just been looking at here in the background. Okay, and then we come down to this big lumberyard that I was talking about at the bottom end of the line, or towards the bottom end of the line. The Sanborn insurance map says it's called the Northern Lumber and Fuel Company, but I don't know if it was still called that in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Looking at aerial photographs, it was still rail served in 83, but unfortunately the next photographs I have are from 1993, and then the site is virtually empty. So it closed sometime between 83 and 93, but I don't know when. And I don't know if it had another name. I would like to know, because I know I can search on that name and maybe find some more information. I searched for Northern Lumber and Fuel Company, didn't really find anything. And you can see it's a very long trailing siding. So they would have to come past and then either pull out the empties first and then back them out and then push in the loads, or they would leave the loads standing and pull out the empties first and then pull. I'm not sure which way they would do it, but either way, after that, they then proceeded further down the line to run around the empties, and then they would pull the empties further north. And that's why we saw that train earlier with the locomotive heading north with empties trailing. Aerial photograph, and I can zoom in a little bit, and you can see no fewer than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rail cars. So this is a big industry. It had a lot of traffic. And you can see also by the size of the place, lots and lots of material there. And I'm guessing they just unloaded and then went off to trucks to all the building sites. I wonder even if these here are all truck trailers, which have been loaded or are going to be loaded. Looks like a tractor here on the front. And so I'd like to include some semblance of this lumberyard on my layout in one corner of the room towards the end of the line. I can go into that a bit more later on. I don't have any photos or plans of that yet. But another photo from Steve Klishinsky, taken just a block further south. But you can see here the engineer, he's looking north. And again, the cab is also on the north end. This is a DS441,000. Again, spotting feature is the gusset. And these are lumber cars. This is a combo door box car. So that's almost certainly got lumber inside. And there's a lumber load here. And this looks like, judging by the length of the side here to the door, like there might also be 2 doors in this box car. And that it's a 50-footer. And so they're probably going to push these loads into that lumber yard. Okay, that's as far as all the industries along the line are concerned. So, and once they finish switching, they would proceed further south to the passing siding I was talking about, or run around the siding, as we would call it now, because there was no point in passing any traffic because the line was cut off further south. And you come to the Minnehaha Depot, which used to be the first depot further south on the line between Minneapolis and Mendota. And as mentioned, it was a popular location for tourist trains and all sorts of exhibition trains, events, because they could just park a train here safely out of the way because the line wasn't very busy even before the bridge was cut. This is 38. Unfortunately, all of these locomotives were destroyed, none survived. Another shot, unknown steam switcher. It says shoving a cut of cars, but I'm thinking it's coming back. It's already run around and it's heading back north. It looks also like the smoke might have been going away. Otherwise, there would be more smoke towards the camera, I think. And again, steam locomotive with the cab facing north and the water towards the south. The depot was called the Princess. I'm not sure if that was because the depot or because of the name of a passenger car that was located there for a while. Here you see the same train that we saw earlier heading south before it was running around. This is from one of Steve Klishinsky's books, Minnesota Railroads, I think it's called. American tourist train also came down here when it visited the Twin Cities on its tour around the States. And this train was really long. You can see the depot here in the distance. And you'll see in a minute, this is the switch at the end of the runaround siding. This is 52nd Street at the bottom of the runaround siding with a Griswold signal in 1975. And here you can see that the runaround siding quite clearly. It's bending back towards the locomotive to the switch, which was under the locomotive almost. 1978 photo of the Royal Hudson when it was just arriving at the Minnehaha Depot. And I think all of these trains didn't use the runaround siding. The Milwaukee Road would pull them out with some diesel power. Maybe somebody who was there can confirm that, but that's what I think I read somewhere, that they were pulled out. I definitely read that they were pulled around one of the what do you call the Y, one of the legs of the Y. That was at South Minneapolis. Another blurry shot of part of the depot and a Sioux Line era. You can see some black here on the side and what's probably the Sioux Line stencil on the side of the cab. Bandit painted MP15AC heading back north, and the conductor is taking a rest on the front of the locomotive. He's done his job. They've run around and they're heading back north again. And again, cabs on the north end, just to repeat. Wisconsin Southern took one train down there at one time, Christmas time, 20th of December, 86. And I believe this is the actual locomotive that's now owned and being repainted into some fantasy Milwaukee Road scheme. I think it's an FP7, not an F7. That would make sense actually, because it's a passenger train that would like to have the head end power, so it's an FP. And I think this is the last photo I have for you guys. An hour and 20 is pretty long. And you can see the line is being cut off here. No, there's an extra shot. There's a bonus. 1933 shot of a streetcar line paralleling. Either this is Hiawatha Avenue or Hiawatha Avenue was down here somewhere. But that was it. That was the first slide.